Shahidi. I am an actress and producer. I'm also most notably a senior in college. And so much of what I do really is about the project of how to bring equity through the arts and through creativity, which is why I'm so excited for this conversation, whether it be in my partnerships in the fashion space or even what we do in television production and creating content. We know the ability and the capacity of art to change so much of how we see the world. And that's really my main focus.
Everything Yara said is the reason we were excited to work with her. But she's being very humble. She goes way beyond that because I think she's not only an activist for great social causes, but she's incredibly talented and beautiful and smart. And I would say one of the most relevant young people in the world today. So, Yara, we're very honored and proud to work with you.
Thank you.
So I started my business 35 years ago. And prior to starting my business, I had a business called People's Place. And People's Place was really set up as a jeans shop. But I wanted to have a fashion line and a fashion retail operation that was for the people, everyone. Everyone from different backgrounds, different sizes, different shapes, different colors, different nationalities. And then it evolved into my own brand of Tommy Hilfiger. And Tommy Hilfiger was really set up to, I wanted to create very cool casual clothes for people who wanted to wear something different from what was out there at the time. And I have been obsessed with music and musicians since I was a young boy, and I wanted to dress musicians. Mm-hmm. So I started dressing people like Lenny Kravitz, Britney Spears, Aaliyah, Jay-Z, P. Diddy, Snoop Dogg, and I became obsessed with the hip hop community. So I was really the first person to do streetwear. And when I was doing streetwear, it was really all about big logos, oversized clothes that are now back in fashion. But I wanted them to be affordable and accessible for everyone. But then the business started growing worldwide. And while I was growing the business, I had a dream to make enough money to give back. So I have given back to the Fresh Air Fund, where we unlock opportunity for young people who are less fortunate. And we also help build the MLK Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C. And we have donated to autism and MS and breast cancer. So we're a very giving company. And I think it really came from my initial desire to be able to give back when I became successful. So we continue to do that, but also we continue to be disruptive and unique and unusual in the fashion space. Mm-hmm. So here we are.
I mean, it's interesting. I think, of course, everybody has familiarity with you, the brand, but to just kind of hear your own take of your own kind of upbringing through the fashion space, the continuity of being for the people, starting with People's Place, and then seeing the way in which you quite literally took that to finding ways to be of service, not only personally, but through what the brand could do is really cool. And I think speaks to what happens when being of service is a part of your mission statement and not something that you kind of do on the side.
Thank you. Thank you for realizing that and pointing it out, because it is very important to us. Mm-hmm. Yara, can fashion help drive sustainability and social justice in society?
Absolutely. I mean, I love that question. I think it's so much of why the Pass the Mic campaign was so resonant for me too, was because it's the acknowledgement of the space that fashion takes up in our world as both a creative force, but also a force for change, something that unites us, and something that brings us all together. And oftentimes I think of fashion as political because when we think of who has access to what, who has access to tools and means of self expression, oftentimes that's indicative of where we stand in our current like political or social landscape. And so when we think of these two buckets of environmental sustainability, fashion really has the opportunity to lead the way in terms of saying this is how we can produce responsibly and also set standards for what consumers can expect. And then on the side of social justice, exactly kind of what we talked about and even what you've already touched on in the intros of the power that happens when you have the idea of being socially responsible in your mission statement ingrained in what you do. And whether it be through campaigns, in philanthropic donations, or just by setting new tones and helping create new cultural norms, those are all ways in which fashion can work alongside political movements.
Very well said. Very impressive.
Yeah.
You have that knowledge in that mind of yours, because this is really where we're headed, and this is where we want the world to go. We want to be leaders, and we want people to follow us.
Oftentimes we talk about consumers as the people with purchasing power, the individuals, but I'm really curious about what Tommy Hilfiger as a brand is a consumer of, and how is that changing?
Well, as a brand, I think we're consumers of pop culture and what is going on around us in the world. Because the more informed we are and the more open we are to new ideas and how people are thinking and how people are behaving influences and inspires us.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said before, we want to be leaders and we want to set great examples. And the more knowledge we have about how people are thinking and how they're feeling and what is going on in the world of pop culture, the more informed we are, and therefore the better we're going to be at what we do.
Mm-hmm. And it speaks to your origins in streetwear too, because that's something that really prioritizes what is happening in people's everyday lives. How do you give people tools for self-expression? And oftentimes I think fashion can be seen as something that only occurs on red carpets, but your level of versatility kind of speaks to the idea of like, what happens when you start with the individual and what happens when you start by paying attention to culture and let all things blossom from there?
Well, that's really interesting because recently we did a collaboration with Zendaya.
Mm-hmm.
We, when brands do collaborations with either actresses or actors or musicians or celebrities, they control what it is that is being developed into a product.
Right.
But I sat back and I said, Zendaya, you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
That I can't believe you're even saying this. What do you mean, whatever I want? I said, whatever you want, whatever colors, whatever fabrics.
Mm-hmm.
And she had Law Roach, her stylist, whom I know you know, Yara.
Yes.
Is an incredibly talented stylist and creative mind in and of himself, working with her, and they developed what they thought was going to be appropriate for the runway and for fashion, and it was a blockbuster success.
Right. I mean, I was in attendance at I think one of the first shows in Paris, and it was just absolutely breathtaking watching all of the Black models walk the stage in the collection. And it's what's striking really about all of your partnerships. I'm grateful to know so many of the people that you've been in collaboration with and know that they are wonderful humans inside and out, whether it be Lewis Hamilton, Zendaya, Gigi Hadid. And I love the fact that each of them and the collaborations that you all produce together kind of represent a different point in the culture and a different kind of tether. And so I am sure so many people are drawn for totally different reasons to this collection because it's resonant and because it feels grounded in the things that we care about.
There is an authenticity to it as well, because I think people in this day and age know what is authentic and what is not. And I think we're very well aware of the fact that it was real. It was not designed for Zendaya. It was designed by Zendaya. And so I think that, look, being very transparent, being open, being honest, and being real is part of being relevant in the culture today. And that's really something I want to stand for in a big way. Well, Yara, I'd just like to simply ask you how you and your peers would like to be addressed as it relates to not only fashion, but the culture.
That's a great question. I mean, I think what I love about my generation is our emphasis on self-expression, especially the emphasis on the agency we have in how we want to be referred to, how we want to present to the world, and the respect that we're demanding to honor how we choose to present. And so when I'm thinking of fashion, oftentimes, really, there's a very real utility to it. It's not just something kind of frivolous, but really integral to our self-expression. And I think the best way to describe it is as a tool. And so going to our conversation on authenticity, there's something really cool about being able to purchase from authentic brands, because that in and of itself becomes a tool. I know, thinking of the fact that I've gotten to wear some of your latest collections as well as archive, there's something about the fact that there are collections that span and fit every moment or desire for my own self-expression, whether it be the fact that I grew up shopping in the boys section and grew up feeling most comfortable. I think every big event of mine up until the age of 16, I celebrated in a suit because that's just who I was. But the reason I bring that up is it's really important to feel like we're not being pigeonholed, but if anything, people are paying attention to us and we are active collaborators in shaping what the future of fashion looks like. And I think the same goes for every brand. We're really big on authenticity and this idea that you've already discussed of not only sharing these kind of outward values of saying, hey, we care about X, Y, Z, but caring even more deeply about how the brands operate when we're not looking. And so you pointing to the philanthropic component of the brand speaks true to a tenet of our generation, is that we don't want to just be consuming for the sake of ourselves, but how can we be responsible consumers that are focusing on giving to brands and purchasing from brands who have an emphasis on giving back, have an emphasis on continuing to give dignity to communities that go totally overlooked.
So well said. Incredible.
Even thinking about somebody else that I know, we both know India Moore. They are absolutely incredible. And so many times, I think what happens or what we've witnessed is ways in which pop culture takes inspiration from these trendsetters, people who are putting their livelihoods and voices on the line to be authentically themselves, but oftentimes not given credit. And so I think we're also in this new phase of really paying attention and being mindful of giving credit where credit is due. As a form of equity in the fashion space.
Absolutely. It is a form of equity for sure.
So, I mean, we've talked and throughout this conversation about consumers, not only what you consume, what the brand consumes, but also how consumers are in relationship with you all. And so I was wondering, one, have you always used this term consumer within the business world? And do you feel like the fashion industry could ever have an alternative to that word?
Well, the word consumer reminds me of something very corporate.
Yes.
It sounds like, a Wall Street investment banker might be talking about, the consumer for Ford Motor Company or Chevrolet or Pepsi-Cola or something like. And I probably use it too often, but I don't really like it. And I really believe that I like to talk about the people, because the people worldwide are the people who embrace my brand and my values and who I am and what we stand for as a brand. So they may be in Indonesia, they may be in southern India, they may be in the Amazon, they could be in New York City or even in Dallas, but they are the people. So I prefer to use that rather than consumer, but I find myself sometimes using the word consumer, thinking that the people I'm talking to will understand who I'm talking.
Right. Right. But that's really
We're talking
interesting.
the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the people hits on this element of just having or being a part of a global community, whereas consumer oftentimes it feels like, okay, then we're broken into certain demographics, and those demographics are targeted in specific ways versus going back to just kind of the tenets of your brand, but also of the conversation and what we've spoken about specifically in terms of feeling like with authenticity, you reach more people and wanting it to be a tool for all people.
That's exact. You hit it on the nose. Yara, what does fashion mean to you when you're thinking about changing the world? I think you answered it in the previous statement, talking about that it's a tool, discussing the idea that it's a tool. But I would love to hear what you think, sort of like long term and globally.
Yeah. I have a couple thoughts. I think one, very practically, fashion is what we change the world in. And oftentimes what we wear to change the world definitely has an impact. You think about so many of our movements, there is an aesthetic to them, intentionally so. It is making sure that you're using fashion as a public statement and a public disruptor. But when I'm thinking broadly and thinking even particularly about this larger cultural movement to shifting who is in charge of self expression, who is in charge of determining who you want to be. I think fashion is a leader in that space because we can move so far past constructs of gender, of what people are supposed to be wearing, and really help instate and experiment with what a future can look like right now. And so, as we're still now, just as a society, getting the terminology and tools to better understand our self expression as a spectrum, I think fashion already has a space in which it's doing that. And so, I feel like as long as fashion still wants to be a leader, there's so much endless potential in using this space where I'm like, I don't know where else you get the creative liberties of experimenting with things that have yet to become cultural trends or fads, but not only become taste makers, but also taste disruptors. And so all of those elements are what make fashion feel like an absolute catalyst for change. And I'm only more and more interested in how not only my generation will continue to use it, but how we're going to inevitably see fashion intertwined with social progress. And for you, again, you already also touched on this in terms of talking about mission statement and talking about the impact you've made through fashion. But what does fashion mean to you when thinking about changing the world?
Well, I think about how people need to feel. And I think that people need to feel good about themselves and about life in general. And I think that fashion does have an effect on how people feel. And whether they're buying a new pair of sneakers or maybe a new pair of glasses or even a new t-shirt, it makes them feel good. And it makes them feel that they are looking better than they might have looked prior to wearing whatever they're wearing. But I think there's a feel-good factor that is very, very important. And I think in this world today, with so many political issues, so many economic issues, so many issues with poverty, with disease, with everything we're facing, we have to feel good. And I want to see people feeling good, whether they're buying product from me or someone else. If they can buy something to wear that makes them feel better, hallelujah. I love that.
Right.
And
I love the way you put it, because it is just that personal. I think people that know me and have seen the evolution and my ever-changing fashion sense know that I often speak about fashion as my way of just carving out my little stake in the world especially when placed in environments that you're talking about that are just feeling a bit like chaos when we're processing what's happening in the world around us. There are certain things that I take pride in being in charge of, such as what I get to wear that day and how it makes me feel.
Well, I think you have a very big voice, and we need people like you standing up, waving the flag for what is right and what is correct in the world, how we feel about ourselves, how we treat others, how we embrace the good and shun the bad. I think we need more voices like yours.
Well, I'm grateful to be in conversation with you. I feel like oftentimes, as long as I have known, worn, been in partnership with the brand, like I think it's really cool to continue to dive into the personal aspects of what go into fashion decisions and how we choose to engage with fashion in the world.
We want disruption. We want to
Mhm.
continue to disrupt and think out of the box.